Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the ALO Village Classic Wash Processed Ethiopia from Natsui Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Natsui, based out of Hangzhou, China. And this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the ALO Village Natural Processed Ethiopian Coffee. And as is usually the case when trying out a brand new coffee roaster for the first time, I like to review one of their washed and one of their non-washed offerings, with this one acting as the washed representative. And I've also said in the past that I'm not the biggest fan of reviewing wash processed Ethiopian coffees, largely because I've had so many of them in my life that it's very hard for one to separate itself from all of those other washed Ethiopian coffees. That being said, I've heard a lot of really positive things about the ALO Village coffees this year, so we decided to go ahead and purchase a couple of them from this coffee roaster, and it'll definitely be interesting to see how they turned out, as this right here is day 50. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a higher extraction one at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the ChemX, which usually indicates a more medium grind. However, we also went a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Now, roast profile for this coffee, once again, they have a color reader listing on the bags itself, and this one does indicate that it is on the lighter side of things, and that definitely did translate into the experience once again. As we mentioned in our previous Natsui review, that they are similar to Big Sur, which is definitely on the lighter side of things. A lot of the more recent experiences we've had with some of these Chinese-based coffee roasters have definitely been on the lighter side of things. Now, there are still some lighter coffee roasters that we have reviewed on this channel, but even then, I can definitely say that this one skews on the more light side of things, verging on the very light side of things. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 24, first impression through the V60, and the coffee was about as straightforward as you would expect for a washed Ethiopian coffee, offering plenty of florality, citric qualities, and a tea-like experience with some slight traces of stone fruit as well. Profile is pretty nice, as it's definitely pretty light, and it had plenty of intensity to go along with a relatively extended finish. So extremely straightforward, a lot of what I was expecting from this coffee, but presented in a slightly more intense and enjoyable sense, so nothing but positive things from this first try. Day 27, through the ChemX, and the coffee is offering a lot of similarities to some of the Hangzhou coffees we'd actually reviewed from Archer's earlier this year, as there's a primarily citric presentation followed up by some peach on the back end. Pretty clean and straightforward yet again, with a nice level of intensity, and those have been my first two impressions of this coffee, and they were both pretty consistent, just a little bit more intense, a little bit more sweet, and a little bit more enjoyable in that sense. Day 30 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee was nice yet again, as it continues to offer a very classic representation of a wash processed Ethiopian coffee, this time offering a slight bit more of a banana-like quality that's in line with the listed mangosteen. So in addition to that, the coffee has been a little bit more tropical, but clean with traces of the peach and florality once again. So as of this moment, first three impressions have all been pretty consistent, as this coffee is just offering a little bit more tropicality this time around. Day 33 through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments, so 17:1 at 99 Celsius and a more fine grind. Based off the first couple of tries, I definitely felt like this coffee had room to be pushed, and it definitely translated well, as it was better this time around, offering a bit cleaner and better defined experience with a lot more of the pronounced peachiness as well. And obviously that's going to be a big selling point to me, as a lot of people know I'm a huge fan of more peachy qualities within coffees, especially washed Ethiopian coffees. Refreshing with more of the tropical qualities once again, so haven't really had too many things to take away from this one, largely because it's a lot of what you would expect for a coffee when I basically say it's a washed Ethiopian coffee with a little bit more intensity, especially in the fruit sense. Day 36, through the ChemX with the same adjustments, and the coffee was the best that had been to this point, offering an even cleaner representation of a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. Very, very clean. It definitely felt like this coffee does benefit from being pushed a fair bit, as the peachiness is the primary quality once again, especially in terms of a sweeter, candied aspect to it as well. So a lot of really positive things to say as of this moment. And on day 39, we opted for the V60 with the same adjustments, and it does continue to perform well regardless of which brew method we offered or opted for. Even at the very start of this coffee, when we were just getting introduced to it, I felt like it was pretty nice, especially in terms of the overall sweetness and intensity that it did offer. All pushing it really seemed to do was accentuate a lot of those really positive qualities, and that did seem to translate in this experience once again, as it really doesn't sacrifice any of the clarity whatsoever. Extremely clean coffee right from the start. A bit of candied aspects to it with some fresh fruit forward experiences, as well as a sweeter tropical, peachy, and citric quality, and a little bit more of some melon-like components this time around. So an abundance of fruit characteristics within this one. Day 42, final notes we have through the ChemX with the same adjustments, and the coffee is excellent in this brew method as it's offering an above average level of clarity even for a wash processed Ethiopian coffee, which I feel like is a bigger compliment than it actually sounds like, because washed Ethiopian coffees, especially non-Gesha ones, do tend to be just very clean coffees in general. Obviously the Gesha ones are even cleaner than that, but saying that a average wash processed Ethiopian coffee is cleaner than the average one, that's definitely saying something. Off brew, there's an extremely well-defined banana-like quality that continues to remain in line with the listed mangosteen. And for me, mangosteen does taste a little bit like banana, and that's why I continue to go back to that quality within this one. Outside of that, it's complemented extremely well by a peachy and melon-like feel, so definitely plenty of those fresh fruit qualities to it as well. Coffee cools down into a greater focus on some of the citric qualities with a softer lime feel and a very prominent white florality to it as well. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick, and that is the cleanliness level 5. So it is still extremely rare for non-Gesha coffees, even washed Ethiopian coffees, to score that level 5 in terms of cleanliness. But that just demonstrates how clean this coffee was, as right from the onset I felt like it was going to be cleaner than your average washed Ethiopian coffee. But the more and more we pushed this coffee and the better defined it became, the more I said it's justified at that level 5 mark. And even if it's maybe not quite as clean as a lot of the Panamanian Geshas that we review, it's definitely on the significantly cleaner side of things, even relative to a wash processed coffee. So level 5, where we opted to put that. Loved the definition and clarity within this coffee. That was easily the biggest and best selling point to me on this one. Handful of level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4. I think that the finish could be maybe one of the less enjoyable qualities for me, largely because there were times where it was a little bit more citric forward. But even then, some of the other days when the peachy aspects were shining through a little bit more, I definitely enjoyed the finish within this one. It's not a knock or a negative on the finish within this coffee. It was very enjoyable. I'm just saying that this coffee had so many positives that if there's one slight sticking point to me, it could be that it was a little bit citric at times, but that's really not that much of an issue. Sweetness, level 4. And I knew right from the start that this was going to score a level 4 for sweetness, because even with this one being just at the introductory experience of the coffee, I felt like it was sweeter than the average washed Ethiopian. And one of the biggest issues and sticking points to me with the average washed Ethiopian coffee is that they do score level 3 for sweetness, because they can at times lack that sweet intensity to them. This one was never in jeopardy with this coffee, as this one was very sweet, especially in the fruit sense. Florality, level 4. I can't quite recall whether or not they had any sort of floral note listed on here, but I mentioned towards the end that there were some white floral qualities within this coffee. Even if they didn't have any sort of floral quality listed on here, I can kind of see why. This one was largely dominated by the fruit characteristics to it, but there were enough of the floral qualities for me that I could justify pushing that one up a little bit higher at that level 4 mark. All right, fruit qualities, and we have a lot of them. So we'll start with the berry fruit. And I mentioned the listed, well, I don't know if they have a melon quality on there, but I was definitely experiencing a lot of those more fresh melon qualities to this one. And it was quite well defined and pronounced. So I was very happy with that, scoring there at that level 4 mark. Citrus fruit, level 4. Again, probably my least favorite part of this coffee, but that's me being a little bit of a stickler as to this one, a little bit hypercritical, because it was just so good that if there's one thing I did have to take away from it, it's that it was maybe at times a little bit more citric forward than I like. But even then, it was just so fleeting and never the most abundant quality within this coffee that it's really hard for me to even criticize this coffee for that, because it was much more berry fruit forward or even stone fruit forward, as the stone fruit reached that level 4 mark. And I definitely have to say that the best part of this coffee outside of the cleanliness was just how much of a peachy quality there was to this one, which I was extremely happy with. So having that one there at the level 4 and be the most abundant fruit quality within this coffee definitely seemed to help from my experience. And then we have one level 3, acidity level 3. Not the brightest coffee. Don't feel like it was ever intended to be the brightest coffee. It is a washed Ethiopian coffee, which I feel like the vast majority of them do end up at that level 3 mark. Not usually the brightest coffees out there. And then the final thing worth discussing, the body level 1. I also don't think that's a surprise whatsoever, given that this is a washed Ethiopian coffee and that we did brew it with the ChemX, which in theory would also strip away any of the body that it did have. I think the main reason I enjoyed the ChemX as much as I did was it's the thing that pushed the cleanliness over the top. It was already an extremely clean coffee on the higher side of level 4, but I feel like the cleanliness just seemed, or the ChemX just seemed to define the cleanliness of this one a little bit more to the point where it was justified at that level 5, even if it was at the cost of body that wasn't going to be very high to begin with. So I was fine with that trade-off. But outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Now that I'm thinking about it, this one has to be my favorite standard wash processed Ethiopian coffee that we've reviewed this year. I'm having a very hard time thinking of anything that comes even close to the experience that I did have from this one. And even some of the higher end washed Ethiopian coffees that we've had this year, I feel like this one is on par with them. It's a very strong contender. There are a lot of really positive things about this one. The moment it scored that level 5 for cleanliness, I knew it was going to be one of my favorite Ethiopian coffees that we've had this year. So for that reason, it's not really surprising that I have as many positive things to say about it. Couple that with the fact that it's very floral, very peachy. It offered all 4 of the big things I'm looking for: cleanliness, sweetness, florality, and a very prominent fruit profile, very much in line with my own preferences, and this one was definitely a standout for me in that sense. Easily one of my favorite wash processed Ethiopian coffees we've reviewed this year. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to: your classic wash processed Ethiopian coffee drinker, especially in the lighter profiled sense, because this one offered all of the qualities that you do look for in that. The florality, maybe not as abundant as some other washed Ethiopian coffees, but it's more than made up for by the cleanliness, intensity, sweetness, and a lot of the fruit characteristics in this one, because you can find this one skewing in any specific fruit direction that you are looking for within a coffee like this, all of which present in a very clean and well-defined sense, and also a sweeter and more intense sense. That's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards in this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here is a review of the ALO Village Classic Wash Processed Ethiopia from Natsui Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.